Hi guys, I've been having a look at this question around church support, and apologies if you don't like my mapping because I've gone a bit mad here. Um, but the question asks, church support determined whether nationalists succeeded or not. Do you agree? And I've left that nationalist so it can include constitutional and revolutionary nationalists. Okay, so the first thing you need to think about in this question, or the first thing you need to be aware, support from the pulpit was always important. Okay, but was it the most important factor? Okay, in Catholic Ireland, in this period, you mean support from the Catholic Church was always important. Okay, however, was it the most important factor? Was it the thing that determined whether they succeeded or not? Okay, so if we start off with O'Connell and think about the Emancipation Campaign, um, I've said here that the Catholic Church and O'Connell represented a formidable alliance. We know about how the parish priest acted as a local agent of the Catholic Association. They collected the Catholic rent. They delivered pro-Catholic Association sermons. They basically delivered the news about what was happening. They were the network on which O'Connell built his emancipation campaign. Therefore, the support of the Catholic Church was vital to O'Connell. In the 1826 election, that's the election with the revolt of the 40 shilling freeholders. You may remember we talked about how the parish priest marched the voters to the polls and give them sort of a moral authority to go against their landlords. Again, this was an important weapon in O'Connell's armoury during the campaign for Catholic emancipation. But again, the question is, was that the most important factor that determined O'Connell's success in this period? I mean, and when you're looking at that, you have to think, well, what about then O'Connell's personal skills? The oration, all of that, the fact that his brilliant way of speaking to the people. What about the fact that emancipation had lots of support in the Commons already, and we talked about O'Connell in many ways was pushing a door that was already half open. And what about the weaknesses of the Peel and Wellington government, which were unable to withstand this challenge from O'Connell? I mean, these things were all very, very important. When talking about O'Connell as well, you can also mention this guy, John McHale, known as the Lion of the West. He was Archbishop of Tuam, uh, uh, County Mayo. And I would encourage you to do a wee bit of reading up about him. But again, he gave huge moral support to the emancipation campaign and the repeal campaign, which came after it. We know in O'Connell's repeal campaign, the church was involved in the monster meetings. Clergy were on parade. They held masses at these monster meetings. So again, church support there for the repeal association was very, very important. Yet repeal failed. So can you say then that church support really is the determining factor when in both his emancipation campaign and his repeal campaign, O'Connell had supported the church, yet one succeeded and one failed? Okay, I'll just leave that hanging there, that idea. When we think about militant republicanism, if we deal with that before we go on to O'Connell, I've written here, militant republicanism failed to mobilise the masses in rebellion. The church was always opposed to secret societies and violence. And this guy here, Cardinal Cullen, is very, very important to us. Because he threatened to excommunicate Fenians. He was Ireland's first cardinal, by the way, and was a very, very important figure, and you should mention him in an essay. And again, you need to just read up a wee bit about him. You'll not find too much information on him, which is useful to us. But he did threaten to excommunicate Fenians and refused to allow church property to be used in the funeral of Thomas Baillie McManus, if you remember this guy. He was buried in Glasnevin in 1861 by the Fenians in a huge ceremony. His body was brought back from America, and the Catholic Church refused to allow him to be buried. However, they managed to get a priest to take part in the funeral. It was a huge, big propaganda drive by American Fenians. So that's how you would work the Catholic Church into there. I mean, you could say that these rebellions failed because the Catholic Church refused to give them support, and therefore people were reluctant to give their support to rebellions. If the Catholic Church had got behind the Fenians, for example, would things have been different? However, you could also say that there's other reasons why these rebellions failed. They failed due to multiple factors. Poor leadership. We talked about that in the past. Uh, Poor planning. The economic conditions. If you think about the 1848 rebellion happening during the famine, for example. The weather. If you think about 1867, the Fenian revolt and the snow uh, um, during that rebellion, which sort of put everybody off. And the prompt government responses, how the government managed to respond and infiltrate and put down these rebellions very, very quickly and use repressive measures and coercion and in Gladstone's case, using reform to sort of take away the causes of discontent. So, militant republicanism, did it fail because of lack of church support? Not too sure. When we come to Parnell, don't get drawn into the trap of talking about this. Parnell was a Protestant, but that's not important to this question. So don't even bother going there with that. What you need to talk about with Parnell is that Parnell successfully gained support of the Catholic hierarchy for his APP and National League. And that's his croak, which my voice is starting to do now at the minute. And Archbishop Croke is very important to talk about when you're dealing with Charles Stewart Parnell. It says here, this is just from Wikipedia, Archbishop Croke was a strong supporter of Irish nationalism, aligning himself with the Irish National League during the Land War, and was chairman of the APP. And it goes on. He was also supportive of the Land League. Here's two wee extracts from the Irish Times. As the country was about to suffer another famine in the winter of 1879, we talked about that economic downturn, didn't we? Croke placed his immense moral authority behind the Land League. His public statements about rural distress attracted unfavourable attention in Rome. On acknowledging the chivalrous dash, devoted and determination of Parnell, Croke was asked to explain his political alignment with a person known to be a violent man, preaching socialistic doctrine. So here you hear about Croke getting into trouble with the Catholic Church over his support for Parnell and the Land League. In terms of the Kitty O'Shea affair, which eventually brings down Parnell, I mean, that's one thing that you might want to talk about when you talk about Parnell. The church repudiated Parnell of the Kitty O'Shea affair, so withdrawal of their support was significant. We talked about Parnell coming back and trying to fight a few by-elections after the Kitty O'Shea affair, and the people had rejected him because the church had rejected them. So as the Parnell tragedy shattered the dream of Home Rule, Croke looked to the GAA to rekindle local pride and national feeling. He considers himself to be engaged in a struggle for national independence, but he disclaimed violence in favour of a revolution accomplished by the force of public opinion. So he throws himself then into the GAA and into this cultural nationalism, which we have yet to look at. And therefore, talking about Croke is very, very important in terms of the impact of the Catholic Church. But again, going back to the question, I never lose sight of the question. Listen, this is the problem. When you know so much stuff and you have so many things that you could talk about, you have to keep focused on the question. Church support determined whether nationalists succeeded or not. Do you agree? Now, my inclination would be to sort of fall somewhere in the middle and say, well, look, church support was always important. And the church was important for so many reasons in Ireland, especially in an Ireland where people were mass goers and were very devoted to religion, and the parish priest was a very, very important person within the community who people listened to and took their lead from. But was it the most important factor? Well, is that the determining factor? There's where you get your opportunity to say, in this instance, yes, the church support was most important. But in this instance, no, the church support was important. Here was the other factor which was more important. And you need to sort of bring in all the factors that are that are important. Take the Repeal Association, the failure of repeal, for example. You for that you could say, look, church support wasn't the reason why that failed, because it had church support. The reason why repeal failed was because, well, you could say O'Connell was an old man, repeal was a vague idea. The government that he was facing under Peel was very, very strong. Those are the things which determined the success of or failure of repeal. Parnell, Parnell's success in getting Home Rule talked about in the House of Commons. Was that down to the Catholic Church, or was it down to Parnell's leadership skills? Was it down to the fact that he had created a unified Irish parliamentary party which was strong and disciplined? Was it down to the fact that Gladstone himself had already become committed to the cause of Home Rule? Is the Catholic Church the most important factor? So I don't think for any of these you can really say that the Catholic Church is the determining factor. Maybe emancipation is the one where you would say, look, the Catholic Church was a huge player in that situation. But for the rest, I think there's other factors are probably more important. And that's just my opinion. Feel free to go another direction with it. But that's the type of way I would approach this type of question. And it's not easy. And you've got a lot of strands to pull at. But hopefully if you've got the main players, the main faces, the main names, and the main events, you can make a good fist of tackling a question like this.